Good evening and welcome to the 46th Legislative District Virtual Town Hall. Tonight, you'll be hearing from State Senator Javier Valdez and State Representatives Gerry Pollet and Darya Farivar. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I'll read those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit your question live via the comment section, so please submit your questions now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Before we begin answering questions, I'd like to open the floor up to our lawmakers for some opening remarks. We'll begin with Senator Valdez. Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone out there from the watching out there from our 46th district in Northeast Seattle. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are excited to be able to host this a virtual town hall. You may recall that we had an in-person town hall just a week before session in January, and here we are 10 weeks later into the 15-week session here, getting our work done in Olympia. It's certainly been a busy first 10 weeks of the session with 5 to go. I'm enjoying my this is my third year in the State Senate. This is my first year as chair of the State Senate Tribal Affairs and Elections Committee. I also serve on the Transportation and Law and Justice Committee. And we're just very, very happy to be here tonight and to hear from all of you. Do our best to answer your questions and talk about our budget priorities, our policy priorities, which I'm sure we will get into. But again, I'm going to keep it short because I know we got a lot of folks who are waiting to ask us questions that they have submitted in either prior to going live, but also in the live chat. So again, thank you so much. And who am I turning this over to? Rep. Farivar or Rep. Pollet? I'll let the moderator tell me that.
I believe next is Rep. Farivar.
Thank you so much, Senator. It's so great to be here with you all tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Representative Darya Farivar from the Lake City neighborhood of the 46th District. Proud to be, I think I can still claim to be a new member of the delegation. Also proud to be your only legislator from the Middle East and representing the Iranian community as well. In the legislature, I serve on 3 committees. I'm proud to be on the State Government Committee on Community Safety and serve as the Vice Chair of Civil Rights and Judiciary. Most of the issues I work on happen at the intersection of behavioral health, folks experiencing homelessness, and the criminal legal system. I look forward to talking more about those issues with you tonight. Pass it to Representative Pollet.
I've got the baton. Thank you. We're a great relay team representing our constituents in the 46th District. I'm Representative Gerry Pollet, and I've been serving in the House since 2011. And I serve on the Appropriations Committee, the Education and Post-Secondary Education Committees, and on the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee. So from those committees, you can guess a focus of mine all session long is education, higher education, and funding our schools and keeping our human health and basic services alive so that we don't have intolerable suffering due to massive budget cuts due to our deficit, combined with our fears of what is coming from the federal government. So I look forward to talking about education and those other priorities tonight. And I also want to remind people that we're going to try to save time by only having one of us respond to a question. We work really closely as a delegation. And instead of hearing 3 answers saying the same thing, we're going to try to get through more questions by doing this.
Great. Thank you so much for that reminder, Rep. Pollet. As we get started, I'm going to start with kind of a broad question that has been submitted by quite a few people. So many of your constituents have reached out with concerns about what's happening at the federal level. What are you doing to be responsive to those concerns?
I guess I'll take that first. Thank you for the question. I think we are, of course, all of us, I think, are troubled about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and programs being cut. budgets being cut and all that goes on with what's happening there. I know that we are doing our best, of course, to monitor and react accordingly. I'm really proud that we have an attorney general who has already been our new attorney general, Nick Brown, who's already taken the lead in fighting some of that at the national level. In the state Senate, I actually meet every 2 weeks. Myself and Senator Saldana, representing the Senate Democrats, meet with 2 House Democratic members and staff from the Attorney General's office and the governor's office about what's happening and actions that they're taking. But of course, right now it's we're just monitoring and seeing what could have impacts on us, especially if cuts come our way that we're not expecting, or if again worst case scenario those cuts are actually made. That we know, and I'm very fortunate that we have a strong federal team and Senators Cantwell and Patty Murray, who are out there, of course, fighting for us each and every day. But I will just want to say this, for all of us out there, I think in the 46 to stay resilient. The only way that we're going to get through this is to make sure that we are paying attention, that we are going to fight back, and we are definitely going to keep fighting to keep Washingtonians safe, and of course ensuring that whatever drastic announcements or cuts that come from Washington D.C. that we will be ready to address that.
Great, thank you so much. Rep Farivar or Rep Pollet, would you like to comment?
Sure, I'll jump in. Many of you are putting in the chat, Happy Nowruz. Thank you all so much. Today is the Persian New Year, celebrated by folks in the Middle East and Central Asia. And I want to start off on that note because I think it is so important in these incredibly difficult times that we're experiencing now and that are unfortunately likely to only get more difficult, that we continue to practice joy as an act of resistance, and we continue to uplift and celebrate our communities and the diversity that makes these communities so rich and treasured. One of the things that I have been working on in regards to response from the federal government and a response to many of the unfortunate rhetoric we see unfolding across Washington is making sure that we can keep and enforce really the Keep Washington Working legislation that was passed several years ago. I introduced legislation that would clarify the Attorney General's authority to really be able to investigate patterns and practices of law enforcement misconduct. And that includes things like cooperating with ICE after we have explicitly told law enforcement that they may not be doing so. There's been several different pieces of legislation introduced this year to really get that conversation started on the right foot and really move things forward to give our Attorney General's office the tools they need to really hold folks accountable and uphold the laws that the legislature has passed over the years to make sure that should this moment happen again, that we are ready for it. One of the things I'm also thinking about and holding in my heart right now are all the communities that have been impacted by previous executive orders of the administration, including the travel ban. It seems to be that similar sentiments and actions are going to be taken again, and really trying to make sure again that our Attorney General's office has the tools they need to hold folks accountable and to make sure that these communities are safe, such as communities from the Middle East and such as communities from Iran.
Thank you, Rep Farivar. I had lunch today with several of our state Supreme Court justices, and we're just living in such a fearsome time where we discussed the notion that federal judges or state judges are not going to be in charge of their own courtrooms if we allow ICE to be able to go into a courtroom and remove someone who's there to testify or someone who is a victim of a crime. We have to stand up together. We have to stand with our federal employees. We can't sit back and say, that's awful about how many people are losing their jobs and the gutting of the Department of Education and NOAA, and the list goes on, and Social Security Administration. We have to say, those are our family members, and if we need to, we will be in the streets to support them, and we'll be over at the courthouse, arm in arm, to support them. And if the federal judges are threatened, if state court judges are threatened for doing their constitutional duty, we have to stand up and support them. We can't be quiet. This is no longer a time for being quiet. Our democracy is truly on the rocks, and the judiciary is our last bastion of democracy. We need to stand up all together and say, there but for grace of God, there go I, and I will be out there with you. And as legislators, we're doing everything we can to prepare for each of the scenarios: the loss of education department funding, the loss of support from Social Security, and the list goes on and on. But we can't do it as a state, putting our finger in each hole in the dike. We have to, as a people, stand up for democracy.
Thank you so much for those comments. Just as a reminder to everyone tuning in, you're watching a live virtual town hall with your 46 district representatives, and you can submit questions in the comment section. I'm now going to go to a pre-submitted question. This one is from Shannon. Shannon says, can you strongly advocate for the needs of disabled constituents who rely on Medicaid COPS waivers to live in their homes and not be placed in a nursing home? This one is for Rep. Farivar.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this question. We know that Medicaid and Medicare are lifelines for people. These are programs, these are services that quite literally keep people alive, not just engage in our communities and living in our communities and out of institutional settings. These are lifelines for people. We had a conversation on the floor today in which we raised the point that half of the children living in Washington rely on Medicaid for their support, for their healthcare, for their services. Over the years, I'm really proud to have been a part of a legislature that has worked to try and go above and beyond the floors that have been set by our federal government to close the gaps that exist in our Medicaid and Medicare systems and the ways in which the states can address them. Over the years, we have done work to try and reduce, for example, the affordability cliff for folks on Medicare in particular, and try and make sure that those who are of an income that will still be difficult for them to be able to cover the costs that they need to survive, to make decisions about if they're going to pay for their medications, pay for their healthcare visits, or pay for food and a roof over their head, that those tough decisions don't need to be made, that folks can get all of their needs met. In our current budget crisis, we're in a tough spot. I don't want to sugarcoat it. We're in a really tough spot. And with the uncertainties at the federal level, that makes things even more complicated. There's almost $1 trillion in cuts that are proposed around healthcare, around our Medicaid systems. That is really frightening. I want to be sure that while things are uncertain right now, and while truthfully we aren't going to know the full extent of the damage that it will do to lose the funding towards Medicaid, that you will have us standing up and advocating and working to make sure that the folks who are relying on these services, the folks that are relying on this for healthcare, folks who are relying on this for their lives, will have the resources they need. We are going to hold true and work hard to make sure that we can get folks the services they need, regardless of the situation that we're in. But it's going to be tough. We are not going to have it easy over these years, but know that we will work together and we will work for you to continue that fight.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is another pre-submitted question from quite a few people this time. Ellen, Kathy, Elias, Aaron, and many more ask, what is the state doing to ensure public schools are fully funded, including teachers are getting the wages they deserve, students have adequate resources, and how are we supporting special education in Washington? This one's for Rep. Pollet.
Thank you all for the advocacy for our children and public education. There are a ton of questions pouring into the live feed, and we had so many questions about supporting public schools in the pre-submitted questions. Thank you all. We need to recognize that we've got a very large state budget deficit on the one hand, and B, our school districts are deep, deep, deep underwater. Seattle Public Schools is nearly $100 million underwater for the coming year. And 3/4 of that deficit is due to the fact that the state has failed to live up to its fundamental constitutional and moral duty and to respect the civil rights of students with disabilities and fund special education. We have an unconscionable and unconstitutional cap on how many children with disabilities we will fund in each school district. We asked for a legislative audit that I actually put into law and got funded to say, for the legislative doubters about how deeply underfunded special education was, the legislative auditor did a thorough review and came up with figure and found that our school districts had to fund $590 million of special education out of their school levies last year. It's up to us to make that up, and we can only do that with new revenues. I spent a year putting together a bill that basically gets rid of the cap, increases the multiplier, eliminates the safety net thresholds so that we could attack all the elements of underfunding our children with disabilities. And I'm very proud that the Senate has moved that bill, sponsored by Senator Peterson, Majority Leader and next door neighbor to us from the 43rd District. And we have that bill in front of us in House Appropriations. And the Senate's commitment to funding education is very strong and much stronger than our House funding level was, which is why I voted no on the House funding for special ed and the absolutely dismal bill where we said we would provide only $5 per student in additional operating costs for our kids, which is like a latte per kid, when we needed a 20% increase. So we're continuing to fight for that. And today, Representative Bergquist and I introduced legislation that combines our two bills to lift the property tax cap that funds our schools and puts that money into our schools as constitutionally mandated. And the Senate introduced a huge array of new revenue bills that I strongly support, and several of them include bills that I've introduced in the past, including getting rid of tax exemptions so that we can do the right thing and fund our schools while not cutting healthcare, aged, blind, and disabled supports, food banks. So that's where we are with funding our schools, and it's a matter of whether or not we'll stand up for the revenue to do it.
If I can join in and add something to that, thank you, Rep. Pollet. I want to acknowledge and thank all the advocates and all the parents and the kids who last fall came to the informational sessions that the Seattle School Board had at Roosevelt High School, as well as the rally that then was conducted by parents and children at Sacagawea Elementary School when the proposals were put, especially for Sacagawea, to close that school. Of course, it reminded us that, as Rep. Pollet talked about, we still have not fulfilled our constitutional duty, our paramount duty of fully funding education. But I know all three of us were there early in the morning at Sacagawea, and to see all the parents, especially and all those kids, reminding us that we needed to make sure that we raised the revenue to do the right thing and fully fund our schools. So I just wanted to make sure that was acknowledged And thank you for your advocacy, but demanding that our Seattle public schools actually give real answers and real data on why they proposed what they did.
Great. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to a question from Ryan. Ryan asks, why won't you take action to ditch the switch? This one's for Senator Valdez.
Okay. All right. That's an interesting question. Ditch the switch, which for those of you who may not know, ditch the switch is about having twice a year to change our clocks, either an hour forward or an hour back. Currently, right now, as you know, just a week or so ago, we went to daylight saving time, and there was actually a bill several years ago. I think it was Representative Riccelli who's championed that bill that upon federal approval, Washington State would be one of the states that would be in permanent daylight standard time. And so we would, I guess, have more daylight towards the evening than we would in the morning. There has been a movement over the last few years among the advocates here in Washington State as well as nationwide about moving it back to permanent standard time, which would not require federal approval. We could just do that on our own. I will say that I got a lot of email traffic as the brand new chair of the state government committee in the Senate, which is where this bill lands. It's definitely you have strong advocates for and against which way we should go. And last year we did have a very lively hearing on that bill to move to permanent standard time. It did not advance last year. There was a bill put forward again to do that. It did not move forward here this year, but I'm sure over the interim we're going to have many discussions. I know. Just I think a month or so ago, Senator Patty Murray went publicly talked about the need to actually have our federal government approve and our request so we could be on permanent daylight time. I don't know how that far will get, considering I know she's got, of course, has many other challenges in DC that she needs to address. And we'll just see where this goes over the interim, and I'm sure we'll have more debate and see where this lands here in 2025. But it definitely is a topic. If you had asked me when I came to the House, back in 2017 and now 3 years in the state Senate, if this was an issue I would be heavily involved in or having to schedule hearings for, I certainly would have said probably not. But here we are.
Great. Thank you so much. Our next question is also for Senator Valdez. This one is from Madeline, who asks, why are you not doing a face-to-face town hall?
Oh, okay. Yes. Why are we not doing face-to-face town halls? Well, actually, we do. We do them 2 or 3 times a year. We held one just a days before the legislative session started in January. That was held and hosted by North Seattle College. So that was the first week of January. I think we had a couple hundred people show up in person to that event. It was a well-attended event, and we really, and I think it was like a couple hours long. So we enjoyed that. We will have another in-person town hall like we historically have here in the 46th after the session is over. So look for that sometime probably in late May or early June. But we did feel, of course, we're now week 10 into the 15th week of the legislative session, and we wanted to make sure that we touch base with our constituents, and that's why for this one that we went virtual just to ensure that we could hear from you and answer your questions. But I assure you, we will. I think the 3 of us are all in agreement. We'll always have our in-person town hall before session and after session, and making sure, of course, during session that at least we have that opportunity to hear from all of you.
Great. Thank you so much. Our next question is from Laura. Laura asks, what is Washington State doing to protect the civil rights of the deaf and hard of hearing and people with disabilities?
Thank you for this question, Laura. This is a really important conversation that I'm engaging in right now. I want to start off by saying that, unfortunately, many of our federal laws are at risk right now. There is a movement of folks that are really trying to look closely and carefully at figuring out what is exactly at risk at the federal level and figure out what we can do here locally. Some of what we can do here locally is to codify those laws in our revised Code of Washington, our state laws, those that are currently available at the federal level. For example, I was part of some work this interim where we looked closely at the Federal Warren Act that governs mass layoffs, incredibly relevant when we're talking about tariffs, and trying to figure out what we can do here locally to match the standards and also go beyond them. I'm also starting to engage in that conversation as it comes to the ADA. What we do know is that this administration doesn't necessarily plan to overturn the ADA, but what they have pledged to do is make it impossible to litigate under. Now, those who are familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, we know that it is already rather difficult to use. By no means is it an end-all be-all to serve folks with disabilities, but it was landmark legislation that many other standards are hooked into, and it is critical for us to be able to uphold. I'm having some conversations this interim with folks to try and figure out what we can do here locally to possibly codify the ADA on our revised Code of Washington, and maybe even look beyond it. We know that there are some holes in the ADA. We know that it was built with certain folks in mind and not the full spectrum of the disability community. And we know that there's more work that we can do to protect folks with disabilities and make sure that their rights are upheld. And I think this is an opportunity for us to think bigger.
Great. Thank you so much. Our next question is from Helena. Helena asks Rep. Pollet, childcare is so expensive. Oh, sorry, I have jumped down. Sorry, these ones are actually from Steve and Simon on House Bill 1296. Please explain the new Washington Parents' Bill of Rights and why certain amendments were not accepted.
Thank you. For people who might not have followed this issue, there was an initiative to the legislature, one of 6 that were presented to the legislature last year, and the legislature chose to adopt this Parent Bill of Rights with the understanding very explicitly that we would be reviewing it to see what conflicts there were with existing laws and programs, and noting a great concern that we need to also look at the rights of students for their education. And we spent on the House side till 2:30 in the morning the other day debating this bill. And there were dozens of amendments that were proposed. And we took some of the amendments proposed, but fundamentally, the amendments included things like, and I'm not just putting words in the mouth of the supporters of these amendments, saying that removing a student's right to a scientifically and historically accurate education. What else is school for other than historically and scientifically accurate information as a student right? That is just, to me, astonishing. Other amendments that were proposed included things like saying that parents had to be notified in advance of any medical support given to their child. And it left the question of, under current laws, we provide notice as soon as possible. But what happens if you have an emergency and need to immediately give students something? And there were other provisions saying you had to provide notice if it might lead to future medical costs. Well, the school nurse doesn't know that. Of course, we're for providing notice to parents about anything that happens in their school. And, we had a very different vision to make sure that students have rights to an education that is historically accurate, that doesn't wipe out history. that is medically accurate, that is scientifically accurate. And we also, and I spoke to the very last amendment on the House floor at 2:30 in the morning, saying that it's up to us as legislators to take these votes, not say that we should kick the can down the road and have voters make decisions on this. It's always subject to an initiative, as it started with. So that's why we didn't take many of those amendments.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation, Rep. Pollet. We're now going to go to a live question. This question is from Mar Boyd for Senator Valdez. What about moving the intercity rail bill forward in the Senate, Senator Valdez?
Oh, thank you for this question. So this year, I partnered with Representative Reed from the 36th Legislative District, and I sponsored Senate Bill 5667. I think the House bill is 1837. And this is a bill that I give credit where credit is due. This is a bill that was brought to me from strong advocates and constituents right here in the 46th district. And what it would do is actually would finally bring the long-awaited improvements to the Amtrak Cascades intercity passenger rail service. We all know that our Amtrak service, our Cascades route, is extremely popular here in our state and among our residents. But it's not quite been properly funded, but also making sure, of course, that we are prioritizing it. And so what the bill actually had four main components. It would bring if I can do this off memory, I think a minimum of 14 round trips daily between Seattle to Portland. That's about a 2.5 hour trip. It would 5 minimum routes a day between Seattle and Vancouver, British Columbia. That's about, I think, a 3-hour trip. It would have expectations that it be on time at about 88% of the time. And it would bring some goals of having this completed by 2035. Folks at the Climate Rail Alliance and the Solutionary Rail, and you all know who you are. I'm sure some of you here are here at the virtual town hall. Have really made a strong case over the years about why, again, we need to keep investing in Amtrak and the Cascades route, and why it's just so critical to getting folks out of their cars and into a safe but environmental friendly mode of transportation here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm pleased to report so far. So I have the Senate bill. Representative Reed had the House bill. We both had hearings in each of our respective transportation chambers. It's the House bill, Representative Reed bill, the one that was able to get voted out of the House floor first. So that is the bill that currently is still alive. I am doing my best, as well as Representative Reed, to convince our Senate Transportation Chair Marco Elias from the 21st District, to give it a hearing. I'm positive he will do that. And of course, I can assure you that I'm working my tail off to get that bill, of course, not only, of course, that hearing, but get in and out of committee and then onto the Senate floor for a vote. And it just simply, again, just reinforces that when our advocates and our activists out there have a great case to make on a great piece of legislation, that's our job as legislators is to listen and to act. And that's what I've done my best here to represent all of you who have advocated with me for the last several years as a member of the Transportation Committee to move this forward. So we will give it our best shot, and hopefully this year we can get it across the finish line. So and I do keep posting about this in my biweekly e-newsletters that go out. So let's cross fingers that this is the year.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is another pre-submitted question. This one is from Dick for Senator Valdez. How effective do you think the gun law legislation will be? Are there any metrics to gauge it?
Good question. I have been the honor of the last several years to work on gun safety legislation. It was the ghost gun ban back in 2019. I was the prime sponsor of that. In the House, when I was in the House, I was the longtime sponsor of the high capacity magazine ban. Last year, I was a sponsor of the bill that did pass that expanded limitations on weapons that could be allowed to be carried and prohibited in our libraries and our zoos and our aquariums. This year, I have Senate Bill 5098, which would also now expand that to our parks, which would include community centers and our county fairgrounds in the state of Washington. I am hopeful that this bill did pass out of the Senate, and is currently. We just had the hearing the other day in the House Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, and I have been working very closely with the grandmothers and the Alliance for Gun Responsibility on advocating for this bill, and I'm hopeful. But I think the data shows, of course, that gun safety legislation saves lives. I think there is no doubt about that, and that's what I'm always pledged to do as long as I'm in the state legislature, is do my best to save lives and keep weapons and out of certain places and keep people as and safe, and especially our children safe.
And this is Rep. Farivar. I just can't help myself. I have to jump in on this question and say I'm very excited to pick up the baton from Senator Valdez and get this legislation across the finish line on the House side and get it out of committee and off the floor. We really need this legislation. It's been a long time coming. I also can't resist the opportunity to talk briefly about some of the gun responsibility legislation I'm working on as well. This year, I reintroduced legislation that would prevent bulk firearms and ammunition purchases. This is really important legislation in trying to prevent guns from getting in the hands of folks who aren't supposed to have them. I think a lot about our young people, our students. I think about self-harm. I think about harming others. And I also think about organized crime that is happening and young people who are getting access to firearms in those circumstances. It's really unacceptable that folks are getting access to firearms like this. And this is one of the best things we can do to prevent that from happening. The data on it is quite remarkable. We know that guns that are bought in bulk purchases are twice as likely to be sold in illegal markets. And we know that of those guns, that 64% they're 64% more likely to be used in illegal activity. This is a really important community safety priority that we need to keep working on. Unfortunately, it didn't make it out of the House this year, but you can bet that we're going to continue to push it, continue to work on it, and continue to pass important gun responsibility legislation.
Great. Thank you so much. Our next question is for Representative Farivar from Nancy. Nancy asks, can you comment on the budget plan that has been put forward and how significant the impact will be for citizens and when areas are expected to feel the greatest hurt?
There we go. Unmuting myself. Okay, absolutely. This is a really important question. So since we're sort of in budget season right now, and we haven't had time to, at least I haven't, I'm not on the budget committees, I haven't had time to go through with a fine-tooth comb on what's happening on the budgets that are going to come out. It sounds like the Senate budget came out today. So looking at the budgets we do have, that we have been looking through carefully, are the Inslee budgets. Inslee had a couple of different budget options for us. One with revenue options and one without revenue options. The one without revenue options is the one that was constitutionally required. This is essentially the worst case scenario. If we don't get revenue, what happens? And as you might expect, the impacts will be quite devastating if we have to go this route. The other thing that's really important to note is that while our budget deficit was projected to be large at the beginning of session, at the outset, it has continued to get worse as we go. We are in a really tough situation, and I can speak for all of us and say that we're all going to be pushing for revenue, progressive revenue, to try and make sure that we keep services intact as much as possible and reduce harm as much as possible. The impacts that were proposed in what's called the Inslee Book 1 budget are devastating. I'm looking at my numbers here to make sure we get it right. There was a proposal of a $3.5 billion cut to healthcare, $1.5 billion cut to long-term care and developmental disabilities. There was a $1.1 billion proposed cut to higher education. And all of these issues are going to intersect and create even more challenges and more problems in our communities. If we're cutting from higher education, we're also going to have problems with our workforce. We need more healthcare providers. We need more behavioral health professionals. Cutting higher education is going to make it difficult to make sure we've got the folks in the community to provide those services. Cutting from healthcare and our behavioral health budget is going to have a direct impact on community safety as well. We have a great swath of community diversion programs that are out there meeting people where they're at before harm is caused in our communities. We need to maintain those programs so that folks can get the help that they need and so that we can interrupt that cycle of harm and make sure that our communities are happy and healthy and whole. Thank you very much for this question.
Thank you so much for your answer. Next, we're going to go to a pre-submitted question from Helena for Representative Pollet. Childcare is so expensive. What will you do? What will you do so we can prevent cuts and delays to childcare programs in our state?
Childcare is both incredibly expensive and not available at any price in many areas. And coupled with the fact that many childcare programs are not quality early learning, which we all want to move to quality early learning for every single child in the state of Washington. I have to say, though, we're in a tough situation this year. Representative Farivar just spoke about the shortage of professionals. We need to invest in training early learning educators. We need to then be able to support expanding, having them in childcare and early learning facilities with greater salary support, because right now they're paid poverty wages and often aren't even given health care. And I know childcare professionals and early learning specialists who are on food stamps, and you all probably do as well. And then how do we do this and expand? We were going to make a commitment before we found ourselves in a $11 to $12 billion hole for the coming biennium. We were going to make a commitment to increase the median income level qualifying for early learning and the expanding it to be a universal qualification for people. And we're simply not going to be able to afford to do that this year. The cost of doing the next step in expanding early learning access was $1 billion for the biennium, essentially. And we're finding ourselves not being able to do that at the same time if we are going to also not cut Medicaid. And this is an awful set of choices. We're looking at, do we make investments that prevent people from dying, that do not increase mortality and disease and hospitalization? And this is one of the things where expanding childcare support statewide is probably not going to be able to be funded. But we are moving ahead with other efforts to expand the workforce, expand the compensation, and try to prepare ourselves to be able to get there so that more people qualify. And then this other thing that we're doing is providing our local governments like Seattle with greater opportunity to use local tax revenue and their local property taxes or other revenues to support childcare the way Seattle does. We've got a terrific model here in Seattle, and it's supported by our levy. And then I'd be derelict if I didn't say this as a thank you to all of you. If we didn't vote to keep the capital gains tax, we'd be chopping back on childcare and early learning instead of saying we can't expand it as we'd hoped. The childcare funding in our state and early learning, along with K-12 education, is dependent on that capital gains tax that you all overwhelmingly across the state supported. I think only 2 legislative districts didn't vote to keep the capital gains tax to fund our children's education and early learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to go to a live question, I think actually from a couple different people. The first comment being from Diana. Diana says, I'm an advocate for rent stabilization and support House Bill 1217. The bill passed through the House and will be hitting the floor in the Senate soon. I'm going to skip down to maybe the part where the question gets at it. Okay. As Democrats, I assume you are voting pro on House Bill 1217. How can we get the Republicans to vote pro? I know there are many lobbyists that do want the bill to pass. Is it criminal that renters are being forced out of their homes and onto the streets? How can we stop this crucial issue? And I believe Celia also made a comment just seconding that question and commenting that our neighbors, as well as herself, are being pushed from their homes due to untenable rent increases.
I can start us off on this one, but I bet this is something that we probably all want a piece of. So I'll say briefly, I've lived in the Lake City neighborhood my whole life, and I've seen Lake City change tremendously over the years. I've seen Lake City go from one of the most affordable neighborhoods in Seattle to seeing active gentrification come in. We want to revitalize the neighborhood. We want to keep residents here, and we want to keep the integrity of the community that we have and that we've had for so long. I love the identity of Lake City. I know my neighbors do too. Rent stabilization is a really important piece of that. I was really proud to vote for the rent stabilization this year. It was one of the biggest bills we got off the House floor this year. I know we're excited to see what the Senate will do with it this year, and really excited to have your support to help us get this across the finish line.
If I can jump in, I think outside of fully funding education over the last couple of years, the most email traffic I get has to do with affordable housing / rent stabilization. Was really glad to see the House. I don't know how many hours you were there on the floor voting that night, and all those Republican amendments. But thank you to Reps Farivar and Pollet for getting it done. I am a co-sponsor of the bill on the Senate side, but it's the House bill that's coming over for us to vote. Hopefully soon. I think what also helps in the Senate this year is that we also have a new chair of our housing committee, Senator Bateman from Olympia, who is a champion of affordable housing, and I'm confident and hopeful, but I'll remain confident that this is the year that we can finally make rent stabilization happen. I think it's long overdue, and I think again my email traffic is clear. Our constituents in the 46th district have been more than patient for us for the state legislature to pass this, and I do think this is the year that it will finally get done.
Great, thank you so much.
I would just point out the other thing is that the 3 of us were the primary sponsors last session of legislation, kind of the backup, saying that if we couldn't do rent stabilization at the state level, the 3 of us were the leaders in proposing legislation to allow us to do it in Seattle and city by city, ending preemption.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments. We're now going to go to another pre-submitted question, I believe. This one is for Senator Valdez. Ani Thompson asks, will you support and advocate for an ongoing COLA for TERS and PERS Plan 1 members?
Absolutely. This is something I have voted on every year in my now in my 7th year in the state legislature to ensure that our retirees get the proper cost of living that they earn and that they deserve. I know this was taken away from these folks back, I think, during when Governor Gregoire was governor, and we had the Great Recession, and neither of the three of us were in the legislature at the time when this happened. But I know that ever since then, every year we have to vote and take a vote to give again our retirees, and a lot of these individuals are retired teachers, individuals who gave their career to servicing our kids, and the least we can do is to ensure that they are getting a proper retirement so they can, of course, live with respect and dignity for all the service that they did. So in the Senate this year, we actually came up with a new tool that hopefully will solve this problem going forward, and we won't have to vote every year on a one-time COLA increase. We actually voted to merge this plan with our law enforcement retirement plans. By doing this, it has no effect on the law enforcement retirees at all, no effect, no loss on them, but it would then permanently give them the same cost of living increase to our TERS and PERS 1 folks that we took away from it and give it back to them. And we won't have to hopefully ever vote on this ever again, year after year after year, one by one. So it did pass the Senate, and it's on to the House, and I'm hoping the House can do the right thing and get our retirees this final hurdle that was put in front of them by no doing of their own. So over a dozen years ago.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question was also a pre-submitted question. This one's from Timothy for Rep. Farivar. How are you participating in the effort to increase public safety and law and order in our district?
Thank you for this question. It's a really important one, and one that I know is on a lot of people's minds right now. It is so important that we can all feel safe in our communities and in our homes, whatever form those take. As a lifelong Lake City resident, I can tell you that this is one of my top priorities in the legislature, is really trying to make sure that everyone can feel safe in their communities. And I can tell you that what we're doing right now is really not getting at the root of harm that's happening in our communities. How do we truly interrupt harm? How do we make sure that there is meaningful accountability and meaningful services and support so that folks can move forward with their lives? Right now, one of the things I have been digging into in particular are misdemeanors, and really looking at what's happening statewide, but also here locally in Seattle. I bet you all didn't know that 45%, almost half of the cases that are being prosecuted across the state in misdemeanor court are being dismissed. They're being dismissed with little to no accountability. That's not working out for anyone. It's not working out for our communities, for the victims, and it's not working out for the individuals either, because they are not addressing the circumstances which led to that harm in the first place. I've been working really hard this session and the last several sessions to really try and make sure that folks have the opportunity to get the services, get the supports to address these challenges head on. Behavioral health crisis is going unchecked in our community and under-resourced in our community. And if that continues to go on, unfortunately, folks end up in a worse position and can end up in our criminal legal system. There are some great proposals out there this year to really make sure that folks get those services and supports, make sure that there's accountability associated, make sure that victims get the justice that they deserve and need to move forward with their lives. We can and we need to do better. I appreciate your continued participation in that conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. We're now going to go to our final question for this evening. This one is from Juliet to all of you. Please give us some hope. What can voters do that will make a difference?
I'll jump in. We have to be a community. We have to stand with each other. We have to stand with, as I said earlier, those federal employees who are the people who provide us with access to our parents' Social Security, to our doing the weather forecasts at NOAA, the people who are running the Department of Education, investigating civil rights complaints. We have to stand with our community members, stand strong and be empowered, being out together and speaking up together, not be isolated, not feel like, oh, it's my Social Security check, not someone else's that's in jeopardy. It's all of our Social Security that's in jeopardy. And you have to know that our U.S. senators and our Democratic U.S. Congress members are fighting like heck. We had Senator Murray giving a fiery speech down here to House Democrats to just in response to us asking the same question you just asked. And I was inspired, and we have to be together and take action together. And we have to support the people who are on the front lines.
I think that was an amazing answer. Thank you so much, Rep. Pollet. Do either Senator Valdez or Rep. Farivar, if you want to hop in, feel free.
Sure. I'll just quickly, as I know our time is running out here, and I guess I'll just say the words that I started with when we started this an hour ago: is stay resilient, be resilient, and keep fighting. We all got to keep fighting. We know things every day. You know, we wake up like, what are we going to hear? What's going on today? What bombshell is going to happen? We just got to keep fighting. We're going to do our best to support all of you, all of our residents out there, wherever you're from, and just be resilient. And so I think that's about it.
Very briefly, I will also jump in and reiterate that you also need to take care of yourselves. Do not forget to take time for yourself and to rest and to find some joy. I know tonight I'm going to go celebrate with my family the Persian New Year, and that is how I'm taking back some time for myself and regrounding myself in what's really, really important in this world. And I will also maybe end on a note and a phrase that the three of us have worked very, very hard on over the years to really embed into the culture of the legislature, which is this idea of nothing about us without us. Having you show up to town halls, having you show up in Olympia means so much. Your voices and your stories give us the support and the backing we need to go forward and do hard things and have the hard conversations in the legislature. So please don't stop showing up and don't stop using your voice.
Thank you all so much. So that was our last question for the evening. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. I'm now going to turn it back over to Representative Pollet for any additional closing remarks. Rep. Pollet?
Okay. You can stay in touch with us by emailing us at our firstname.lastname@leg.wa.gov. Because I know this is way too short and you can't get down to Olympia the way the lobbyists can see us, I continue to hold drop-in online or in-person discussions on Saturdays. Email me for this Saturday if you'd like to continue the discussion online between 9:30 and 11. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Stay in touch and stay involved.
And stay tuned for more. I know there were some questions in the chat about revenue proposals. We didn't have a chance to get to those. Know that more information will be shared very soon as we really dig into the budget and have these deeper conversations about the numbers. We hope to have some more conversations with you.
And I'll just add, if you aren't on any of our e-newsletters, we send those out regularly, all three of us, to our constituents. That is also a good way to know that the things that we're continuing to work on, but give you updates, especially now with the budgets all coming out, to stay in tune to what's happening and what actions we need from you or to help or to assist. And so that's also a really good way to make sure that, again, you're keeping in touch of what's going on here, which will soon be in the last 5 weeks. We're 2/3 of the way done, pretty much. We have but just 5 weeks to go. And again, I will also again restate, we will be having we'll be back to our normal in-person town hall when the session is over. So look for that probably again in late May or early June. And of course, we'll make sure that it goes out on our email list and in your actual U.S. mail. And thank you all again for being here tonight, and thank you for all that you do on behalf of not just all Washingtonians, but especially for us in the 46th District.
Thank you so much. So that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you so much for attending and for submitting questions. If we did not get to your question, you can directly contact the lawmakers' offices with your comments. Their contact information will be on the screen shortly. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.